Hello everyone, welcome to my second video on playing Final Fantasy XI on the Horizon 11 server. It has certainly been a while, but hopefully my release schedule will quicken. At this pace we might even leave Windurst by the end of 2025. In this video we'll be going over setting up your interface, enabling configurations that might be useful to you, and a couple of other things with regards to add-ons. So we'll go through each configuration, letting you know what it does and my preferred settings for each one. And this might seem like somewhat of a basic video, but anyone coming from more modern games and newer MMOs in particular might be used to a cleaner, more customizable interface. I find getting my interface set up on a new character is key to making the experience a lot more enjoyable. We'll also go into the basics of some add-ons I feel complement the game well. I'll be playing on this character with a few add-ons installed, which will make it easy for me and you to see what's going on in terms of my health, mana, minimap and many other things. We'll be talking somewhat at length about a somewhat boring subject here, so if you want to find your own way with add-on and interface stuff, feel free to skip the majority of this video. One thing I would recommend is sticking around for at least the start of the config section, which I'll timestamp in the description. This will help you enable a few things which I believe should, quite frankly, be enabled at the start of the game. Things like inventory sorting and the like. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Now, the image you can see on your screen right now is how I normally have my UI arranged. Most of the information I need or prefer to have is at the bottom of the screen, which is typical for MMO layouts. You may notice there's no hotbar for abilities, as you might expect in most MMOs. We'll get onto how abilities and spells are cast in our next video. So to start, we'll go ahead and look at the launcher to see which add-ons I have enabled. Most add-ons that are approved for use in the Horizon 11 server can be found within the launcher itself, and it's as simple as enabling them. So we'll go to our plugins first. For our plugins, I have Minimap, which does exactly what you think it does. It enables a minimap for in-game use. Nameplate will fix some of the properties with regards to how nameplates are rendered. It's just a nice one to have, looks a little bit more clean. And then packet flow essentially increases the amount of updates that the server does between your client and the server. It's just a nice little thing that sort of feels like it speeds up the game in terms of network connections, makes it feel a little bit less laggy. So the first add-on when we come to the add-on section I'll talk about is all maps. Essentially what this does is it makes it so that all of the in-game maps, and obviously for your mini-map as well, are available at the start. Usually you would have to purchase those maps separately from map vendors within the game. It's completely optional whether you want to use it or not. However, I would recommend using it, as it does, it's an unnecessary expense to be buying maps at the start of the game. It's completely up to you, but there you go. When I do talk about maps, I must also mention the Remapster project for Horizon 11 and Final Fantasy in general. Now, Remapster is a wonderful little project here, which is essentially designed to remaster all of the in-game maps. If we are to go onto the Final Fantasy XI wiki for just a moment, which I will do for you, if I was to get a map of Westeron 4, for example, we can see here that the map itself is it's quite nice on the wiki actually. I don't think this is the original map. I believe this might be a map that's added later. However, usually the maps in game, when you are just looking at them in game, are a little bit faded. They're not exactly pleasant to look at by modern standards. Remapster goes ahead and revamps all of those maps so they're much clearer, they're much sharper in image quality, as well as, they do explain certain things which are often missed on some of the bigger maps. The wiki's pretty good for maps if you're happy to use these. However, the in-game maps leave a lot to be desired sometimes. So there will be information on how to download Remapster and, instructions linked in the description below. However, whether you choose to go ahead with that or not, that's completely up to you. I would recommend it, and if you do feel like you would like a video on how to install that, I'm more than happy to go ahead and do that for you. So our next add-on here just going back to it, is Aspect. This is an add-on that allows for better aspect ratios. I play on a 1920 by 1080p monitor. This makes everything look a little bit less squished. And then from there, we'll go to Chatmon. This is quite a useful add-on for when you have things that are occurring, and sometimes in game it's quite hard to keep track of everything. So, for example, someone might mention your name in the chat, and they'll ask you a question. If you're busy with something else, that might not be something you can necessarily pay attention to at that time. It plays a useful soundbite that lets you know that someone's talking about you, but it also adds things like letting you know when your inventory is full, or letting you know when you've gained a skill up. Again, very useful, especially with how busy the interface for this game can get sometimes. Now, the next add-on is Checker, and if there is any add-on I'd recommend you install, it'd probably be Checker. In-game, it's a standard practice to check the levels of the enemies you are fighting. This is because, unlike most games, or most modern games at least, Final Fantasy XI is very focused around group play. I would say that compared to most games with a level system, usually if you're playing a game like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, being level 10 and taking out a level 10 enemy on your own is something that's par for the course, it's expected, and isn't really much of a challenge. In Final Fantasy XI, you'll find that trying to fight an enemy that's on par with your level at lower levels is feasible, if somewhat challenging. Levels 1 to 5 is not something you need to really worry about. Level 10 to 15 is where it starts to get a little bit more difficult, and then as you get higher, it becomes increasingly more difficult to the point of unfeasibility. I would say once you hit level 30 to 40, if you're trying to solo level then, and you're not a class that's particularly well designed for it, like Dragoon, Beastmaster or Summoner, you're going to have a really difficult time. The point is, you'll want to know what levels your enemies are, and these will give you exact levels rather than just vague suggestions. One of the common ones is, this looks like a tough challenge, or this looks like an easy fight. Knowing your level in relation to the level of the enemies is really helpful here, so I'd recommend having that one enabled. Our next one is the clock, which just enables various sort of timers and in-game and on-screen. Just a little one that's quite useful there. Config is also very useful. It will allow for the adjustment of settings through /commands. I believe it also sometimes helps with sorting add-ons out as well, but again, just a small useful thing here. Craftmon is very useful later on. We'll be going into crafting during the course of these videos as well. When you craft in game, or when you synthesize an item, it's quite a lengthy process. I believe the synthesis time is around 10 seconds, and usually you don't know whether you're successful or not until the end of that. All this does is it displays a little message in the chat letting you know whether you crafted something straight away. Quite frankly, I don't like waiting around to know that, so it's useful for me there. And our next one is Equipmon. This shows like a small grid on your screen showing you your current equipment. I find this is the most useful, for me it's especially, is when I'm fishing and I want to see how much fishing bait I have equipped. I can imagine it would also be very useful if you're playing a character that uses a ranged weapon and you want to see how much arrows or how many bolts you have equipped as well. It also just lets you at a glance see what gear you have equipped, so if you have macros, for example, that change your gear, you can at least see it being changed there as well. Next is Filterless, which is just a profanity removal tool. Apparently the original filter was quite strict, and quite frankly I don't feel it necessary to keep this on. We're all adults here and I'm okay with a little profanity when it's necessary. FPS is another really good add-on in terms of modern sensibilities. I haven't quite figured it out yet. It doesn't seem to interact with my system all too well. Essentially all it does is let you change the FPS of the game. So by default, Final Fantasy XI runs at 30 FPS, but this allows for it to be 60 FPS or even an uncapped frame rate. I usually run it at 60 FPS, but when I'm in a busy fight, if there's a lot of people on screen, I'll sometimes experience a weird form of slowdown, which you might see in some of these videos. But generally I like to be at 60 FPS. It makes the game look nice and smooth. Now, I will mention HXUI here. I'm not going to disable it or enable it here in the add-on screen. I would recommend you do. I use HXUI, but I installed it prior to it being included in the add-on list here, so I've got a separate out of launcher install for it. HXUI borrows elements from the Final Fantasy XIV UI and imports them to Horizon, essentially. It adds things like, an inventory tracker, experience bar, health and mana bars, things that if you've played Final Fantasy XIV are more familiar to you. Quite frankly, I find it a much more intuitive user interface, and I would recommend you install this as well. So next is Instant AH. Similar to Craftmon, what this does is it shows the results of your auction house instantly. I'd recommend having it on. It just saves you waiting to see whether you were successful in purchasing an item or not. That kind of thing, really. I have logs on. You don't necessarily need to have this on. It just creates text chat logs essentially for me to view later on. Small thing, but it's up to you whether you have that or not. Macrofix again enables better functionality with macros, makes the menu fade away a lot faster. Again, completely up to you whether you have this one on. This is completely optional. I find it betters my experience. MobDB is our next one. It's a very useful add-on. I would recommend enabling this and setting this to the simplified version, which you'll see in game in one of the future videos. What this essentially allows for is it calls from a mob database, as you could expect, and it will show you information about the enemy you're fighting, such as their elemental weaknesses, the level range which they appear in, and there is also some advanced functionality for hunting notorious monsters or NMs, which we'll get into much later down the line. The next one I install is Pet Info. This will just show health and TP information about the pets that you have. If you're playing a Beastmaster, Summoner or Dragoon, it's very useful to have this on. I won't be playing one for quite a while, but I like to enable it because I just don't really ever turn it off. The next one is, again, an optional one, but I would say this is quite a good one to have. Target lines is a mechanism from Final Fantasy XII. Where essentially it would show you an arc in blue or red between your character and the enemy that you're targeting or the enemy that's targeting you. I personally find with the way that the interface is laid out for Final Fantasy XI, this helps me keep track of which enemies I'm targeting. If I accidentally pull aggro from halfway across the screen from a goblin or something that I don't see, the red arrow or the red line will let me know that I have that aggro and I probably want to think about zoning out of the area or turning around and fighting that enemy. So timers is our next one. Again, this will enable various timers on screen for buffs, debuffs, cast times. I would strongly recommend this, especially if you're a newer player. This will just be able to show you when you can recast your abilities, when you need to recast things like Protectra if you're a mage, or a white mage rather, or when you need to recast things like Dia or Bio or Poison. Very useful to have. And our next one is Zone Name. This is just a bit of fun, really. Essentially, similar to Final Fantasy XIV, it will display the zone and region name when you change zones. It's just a nice aesthetic thing to have, essentially. There are, as I mentioned, a number of additional add-ons that I've installed outside of the launcher. I'll detail these when they're relevant. My goal today is really to get you set up as quickly as possible, despite this long section on add-ons and plugins. So up next we'll get back in game and go through setting up our UI and config settings. Okay, so we're back in game, as you can see. Now, if you think the video so far has been very absent-minded, and if you think that so far we've not really been very concise about any topics, I do apologise. This next bit is going to be completely off the cuff. I'm recording this as we do it. It feels like an easier way of doing it than just trying to write a script for the whole thing, so I apologise if I waver here in what I'm explaining. I'm gonna just instantly move a couple of things. As you can see, our nameplate's already been fixed. It's a lot less squished than at the start of the video. Our aspect ratio looks a lot better. And to be honest, it looks like it might even have had an effect on the textures, which I think is probably part of the aspect add-on there. Now, I'm going to be looking at the screenshot near the beginning of the video for reference for how I have these things. You can obviously move things wherever you want. To move this, I'm literally just clicking and dragging it over. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to enable HXUI. So you can do this by just typing HXUI into the chat bar for the config screen. That's /HXUI. Now I'm going to just enable everything here. It's just going to look a little bit of a mess at the start. And then I will move things around as and when I need them. I'm constantly tinkering with my UI when I'm playing anyway, so you'll probably find that you'll be doing the same. And I'm just going to try and get things as set up as I normally have them here. It's a lot of front-end effort, but in the end it'll be worth it. So we'll move our guild tracker over here, just there. As you can see, I'm already very rich at 10 gil. Move our party UI just up a little bit, and I do like to reduce that in size. As you can see, I can do that from going into my party list here and just reducing the scale. And I believe it's, let's see, here we are. So just scale that down a little bit to 0.85, scale that down a little bit like that. And I don't like having it to be so wide either, so I'll take the font scale down as well. And that'll be good enough for now. We'll obviously be playing with that more throughout our videos, but there we are. I'll try to keep a lot of that off screen. You can probably figure this out for yourself, but you don't want to necessarily do that. I'll also have show TP on these as well, and just move these out as well. So there we go, so we can see those. These two probably won't come up until much later on when we're doing things like Eco Warrior and Alliance raids, but we'll have a look at that later on there. Now I want my health bar to be around here, and we'll look at just again making that a little bit smaller. I normally have it around here, and then the font is also a little smaller as well. So you just heard Chatmon go off in the background there. Someone used an emote while I was trying to set things up here, and it let you know that someone was targeting me with that. So we'll move that over here as well. And our XP bar, I'm just, again, for the size of screen that I'm playing on, all of this stuff is a little bit too big for me, so I will just scale that down to about there, scale that back here, and again this will be more of an art than a science. You'll probably want to figure this out for yourself. But there we go, I'm pretty happy with that, and I normally just put it here honestly. There we go. Now our cast bar is a little bit large as well, and I'd like to center that down here, so we'll put that there. And again, just scale it down to a degree that I'm comfortable with. And yeah, that'll do for now. I'll obviously mess around with this a little bit more later on. But that's HXUI sorted. Now, as you can see, when we do have chat come up, it comes across the entire screen here. Now, I don't like having it set up like this, but we'll change this very shortly. I'm just making sure that my inventory is all sorted, and all of this little thing is to my liking first of all. So there we go, and I normally have that around here. This lets me have a little space here for when we expand our inventory a little bit later. And I normally scale this down. So that was, I'm just going to quickly check the name of that one because it escapes me at the moment. Let me see. I'm going to the Horizon launcher again, and I believe that one was Equipmon. Let's see. Yeah, Equipmon. So we'll see about typing that in. There we go. Now most of these add-ons and the like, you can usually enable or disable the config settings just by typing their name into with a / into the chat. So let's see. We want that to probably be a little bit small. Ooh, not that small. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that there. That's fine. Just like that is where I normally have it, I believe. That should be perfectly okay. Okay, and again, you might find that if you're clicking on something, like right now I'm clicking on something here and it's not moving, holding down shift and clicking will usually fix that. Some add-ons, you know, for example the minimap here, again I need to shift to move this. I actually have this covering my health over here because normally I have my party display just above the minimap, which as you can see at the moment is disabled, but if we go back in here to party list and just have it so show when solo, there we go. So there we go, I've got it all set up to show properly there. I'm gonna move that down and have that grow upwards, and again I apologize for the fact that this is a little bit egregious and a little bit boring to watch. You can go ahead and skip to the config section, which again I've highlighted in my in the description below. It'll tell you exactly where you need to go there essentially for that. So I believe that is correct. Let me move that up here. Okay, that will do for now. I will play with that more later on, but that looks good enough for me. So we'll actually come to the config section, and again I will likely edit a lot of things about my UI as we go along here, but we can address that when we come to it. It isn't, you know, it's not a very well laid out tutorial video, but there you go. So first thing you want to do is press the, I believe it's the minus key. Yep, minus key on your keyboard, and that will open this menu. Now, just to mention in advance, I normally play with a controller. This is the most comfortable way I found for playing for me. There are lots of people who play with controller, and there are lots of people who play with keyboard. This game originally, I believe, came out on the PlayStation 2, so it was designed with a controller in mind. I find it makes moving around and looking at my macros and navigating menus a lot easier to use a controller, but it's completely up to you. So we'll open our menu here, and we'll go to the config selection. And I'm first of all just going to go through a few things that I believe should be enabled straight away by everyone who plays. So we'll go to the gameplay section. I believe this should automatically be on. You'll want to have inventory sort on. It's off by default. I have no idea why. What this basically does is it makes it so that if you receive multiple of the same item, say if you're fighting a worm and it drops a piece of flint, and then you fight a separate worm and it drops a different piece of flint, it will automatically have those items be sort of stacked on top of each other. Now, ordinarily, if you leave this off, you'll have to go in here and you'll have to go to the sort and click auto sort every single time you want to do that. It's very wasteful, and quite frankly, you know, the first time I learned about this, I had like 6 stacks of single crystals in my inventory, so definitely something you want to enable straight away. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Again, this just changes the sort type category. I normally leave this on type 1 for now, and just leave it as it is there essentially. Now, if we go into chat filters, we'll go into this a little bit more later on, I believe, but I'll leave this as is for now. You can also change the color of fonts if you'd like to. I personally leave everything by default. I've got friends who change the color of link shell chats and things like that to make things easier on the eye. You can go into that however you wish. Now, the first thing I normally change is I go to my windows and I go to window 1, and I normally change this to always show, I believe, 10 lines is how I like that. And I also half the window width to about here. Now, actually, I'm going to change that to 9. And maybe even 8. Yeah. That gives us a nice sort of little chat window there. And I'll also reduce the resize time so it doesn't resize, essentially. So have that off. And then I'll go to window 2. and I will show that as 8. Similar there, and let me just check my window width, so it's quite small. So window width here. Now I normally have 2 windows up. My main window here, window 1, which we can see in the bottom left corner here, is normally what I will have for system messages. Things like, there we go, yeah, I was wondering where that would show. So I normally have for system messages, chat, combat logs, that kind of thing. And window 2 over here, sort of in the middle of my screen, that's normally where I have it in, I have my chat, like my link shell chat and things like that. That's how I prefer to have it, but it's completely up to you. And again, we'll be adjusting these little things like this as we go. There's a lot of sort of initial investment when you're trying to get started in this game in terms of setting up windows and things like that, but I promise it is worth it. We will get through this as quickly as we can, and then we can go on to actually playing the game. So window 1, I'm just going to make sure that the chat doesn't have any settings like that. Yep, that all looks about right. Should have, yep, all of my stuff there for, when I lose HP, when I make HP, when others do the same. That all looks about right. Yeah, okay, perfect. So that should be good there in terms of how that's set up. Let's go to miscellaneous settings. Now, some people prefer to have damage just on the screen, because otherwise it can really clog up your system messages chat down here. I have an add-on installed which makes it a lot more succinct here. You'll notice that normally your messages will be a lot more lengthy, especially in terms of damage. I'm happy with having it on both. If you have it on the screen, you just get the damage numbers, when you attack an enemy there. It's completely up to you. Let's see. I normally don't touch this one. I'll leave shadows on normal, weather effects on. I like to have the character models maximized. That doesn't really bother me. And again, I don't normally mess with any of these settings. So miscellaneous 2, I normally leave that alone. Frame rate's fine. You can change your keyboard size if you need to, and it will give you an idea of what exactly these look like when you have them enabled. Quite frankly, I play on a mouse, on a gamepad, so it doesn't affect me in any way whatsoever. And I leave the background aspect ratio as it is because we have aspects to fix that for us, the add-on. Key assignment, I don't change. Macro palette size, I leave as full, and palette position I leave as dynamic. Next, I leave weapon effects on. I keep Starlock on normal. Area display, I keep turned up. I believe I turn that on, but we'll play with that as see where we go. And we also want party icons display and timer display on as well. That will allow timer display especially is really useful because it lets us see our buff timers, which you would think would be on by default, but there you go. And party icon display again will display the icons for our party members for their buffs as well. I believe, or it might also just display what class they are. Either way, you probably want both of these on. And software keyboard 4, I don't touch at all. So effects, these are, I believe, visual effects when you do stuff to enemies. I'm going to leave all these off, but we might change that later on. I can't recall whether I turned any of these off. Screen shaking is definitely going to stay off, but there you go. Mouse and camera, I normally leave these as is. What you might find is, depending on your preferences for third-person camera, you might invert these, but playing with a controller, these work exactly how they should be for me, so that's absolutely fine. And my global settings, I leave the chat language feature on. That's not really something that affects me, and I don't touch the auto disconnect either. So that's quite a lengthy section there with regards to getting set up. Thank you for listening to this video so far. Quite frankly, it's been a very rambly video. In our next video, we'll actually look at playing the game. So thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we'll be able to get started shortly.